that Unity's co-founder, Charles Fillmore, identified what he called the 12 powers of man. His teaching was that there were 12 seeds of greatness within every human being that, if developed fully, would result in the realization of the Christ consciousness. Again, as a reminder, the 12 powers identified by Mr. Fillmore are faith, strength, wisdom, love, power, imagination, spiritual understanding, will, order, zeal, renunciation, and life. For the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at each of these powers in a very down-to-earth, practical way, seeking to understand what the practice of them would look like in everyday life. So this morning, we begin with the power of faith. Seeds of greatness. Let's think about that for a minute. Imagine this scene. A young man named Jesus has been traveling around Galilee speaking to the people. He is such an engaging teacher that he has started to attract large crowds wherever he goes. One spring day, he is walking along the shores of the Sea of Galilee, and a crowd of people are following him, urging him to speak to them. Always having a flair for the dramatic, Jesus climbs into a boat moored just off the shore and sits down, and the crowd also sits on the beach and waits to hear a story. He often taught by way of simple stories, and they just loved it. Well, here's the story that Jesus told that day. A farmer went out to plant some grain, and as he spread the seed, some fell on the path, and the birds immediately came and ate it all up. Other seed fell on rocky ground where there was not much soil, and it sprang up quickly, but because it had no deep roots, when the sun rose, it was scorched, and so it withered away. Other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and so it yielded no grain. But other seed fell on good, rich soil, and brought forth grain, which grew and spread and yielded 30 and 60 and 100-fold. So what is this good, rich soil in which seeds bear such amazing abundance? That soil, according to Charles Fillmore, is faith. It is the foundation, the essential first ingredient for a life of peace and abundance. So now already you may be thinking, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. Because I am a person who has lots of doubts. I'm not at all sure how strong my faith is, or even what I truly have faith in. Taking a closer look at the parable, we see that Jesus addressed these very concerns. When the farmer plants the seeds, that is, when we hear words of spiritual truth, some of them fall on the path and the birds come and eat them up. Sometimes we hear the truth, but our well-worn path, that lifetime of habits and mindsets constructed by our ego, are so strong that the truth teachings go in one ear and out the other. And sometimes the seed falls on ground so rocky and so hard that no roots can go down, and so the sun scorches it and it withers away. Sometimes we are overjoyed when we hear those words of truth, but we do not maintain the spiritual practices and attitudes of the heart that keep that message alive in us, and so it doesn't take deep root. It remains superficial, where it has no power to help us change or get us through the hard times in life. And sometimes the seed falls among thorns which choke it out, and so it cannot grow and bear fruit. Sometimes we hear the truth and recognize it, but are unwilling to live in accordance with it. It just seems too hard, Despite the truth we know in our hearts, we continue to search for our happiness in material things. I know you've never done that. I've never done that. Thus, our minds get filled up with desires and attachments that may even conflict with our spiritual values. This is a really sad situation to me because it always ends up in disappointment and disillusionment. Material things will never give us the peace and joy we're looking for. And if we think that it will, it can lead us to believe that spiritual truth doesn't work for us, not in the reality of everyday life. And then there are the seeds planted in good, rich soil, which thrive and grow and yield 30 and 60 and 100-fold. When the other 11 powers are planted in the soil of faith, they have the perfect environment in which to grow and produce a life of peace and joy. Now, being that most people in Unity are spiritual seekers, we know the importance of having a positive vision for our lives. You've probably heard the old axiom from Unity teacher Eric Butterworth: if you can conceive it and believe it, you can achieve it. Often we think of this vision as a mental picture of the things we want to do and have. And this can be pretty powerful. Take these three, for example. A Catholic, a Baptist, and a Charismatic all died and went to heaven. When they arrived before St. Peter, he regretfully informed him that their rooms were not yet ready, that the only place with space for them was in hell. Lucifer had graciously agreed to let them stay there for a week or so while their rooms in heaven were being renovated. The three, being stalwart souls, agreed, and off they went to hell. After 3 days, St. Peter received a frantic call from Lucifer. I'm sending those three back up there today. They can't stay here for another minute. The Catholic is going around forgiving everybody. The Baptist is going around saving everybody. And the Charismatic has already raised enough money to air condition the place. Doing and having. But the 12 powers call upon us to hold a different kind of a vision. We alluded to it last week. And that vision is a vision of who we want to be. The idea that our way of thinking affects the quality of our lives, that we create our experience of living through our thoughts, is not new. Unity claims it, but it's far more ancient than that. Here's what the Buddha had to say over 4,000 years ago. We are what we think. All that we are arises from our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness will follow you as the shadow unshakable. Now notice that he said, all that we are arises from our thoughts, not all that we do or all that we own. Here, the Buddha teaches that the quality of our character is determined by the thoughts we allow ourselves to dwell upon, and that the quality of our lives is determined by the quality of our character. So, what are those thoughts that will result in the happiness we seek? To understand, we look to one of Jesus' most repetitive and consistent teachings. To the centurion whose servant was dying, he said, "Go, let it be done to you according to your faith." And he healed the blind man and said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." And to the woman tormented by a demon, he said, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." So, okay, get it? Faith is the key. But faith in what? Over and over again, we heard Jesus say, "It is not I, but the Father who does the work." Wasn't he telling us that it is faith in and cooperation with the power of God that will open the doors for us? And wasn't he also saying that this faith is what gave him the amazing ability to heal people? In the Gospel of John chapter 14, we find Jesus talking to his disciples shortly before his arrest. He's instructing them on how to carry on the work that after he is gone, and they are very afraid. And he said to them, "Very truly I tell you." Oh, that's what Jesus said when he wanted them to really listen up. I'm going to start using it here. "Very truly I tell you, the one who believes in me and will do the works that I do, and in fact will do even greater works than I do. He who believes in me will not only do the work that I do, but even greater works. Whatever you ask in my name will be done so that the Father may be glorified in you." Now, when Jesus says, "He who believes in me," he is not saying what most traditional religions teach. I don't believe so. They believe that he is saying, "Believe in me because I am God." We in Unity believe he is saying, if you believe in the things you have seen me do, if you will take heart to heart the lessons that I've taught you, he is telling them that they can do greater things than he has done by calling upon the same power that he consistently called upon, the power of the Father, the power of God. The Buddha also said, "Speak and act with a pure mind." Now, I'm pretty sure he didn't mean what the nuns meant when they told us teenagers we had to have only pure thoughts. No, he was referring to something else. He was referring to the difference between human mind power, seeking to get everything we want through the power of our minds, and spiritual power, seeking only to align our minds with divine mind so that the power of God can work wonders through us. This difference is huge. It's something in the order of the distinction between Jesus' teachings on how to work miracles and the strategies for abundance taught in real estate school. Maybe this little story will clarify the difference. A very earnest and dignified young pastor was visiting a lady in a nursing home who was confined to a wheelchair. As he stood up to leave, the lady asked him to say a word of prayer. He gently took her hands and prayed that God would be with her and bring her comfort and strength and healing. When he finished praying, the old lady's face was aglow. She said softly, "Pastor, help me to my feet." Nervous, but not wanting to discourage her, he helped her up. At first, she took a few uncertain steps. Then she began to jump up and down, and then to dance and shout and cry with happiness until the whole nursing home was in an uproar. After she was quieted down, the solemn young pastor hurried out to his car, closed the door, grabbed hold of the steering wheel, and prayed this little prayer: "Lord, don't you ever do that to me again." Scared him to death. Funny little story, but actually quite meaningful. It tells us that faith is truly a powerful thing, powerful enough to get that old lady on her feet. And that the practice of faith is an intimate thing. It's that dedicated, sweet young preacher, trembling in his car, talking to God like his best friend, even chastising God, yet at the same time awed in the presence of such a demonstration of power. He knew, like you and I know, that he alone did not possess enough faith to make that happen. He knew that he possessed only a grain, the smallest seed of faith. Why, it hadn't even occurred to him that that old lady could be healed. But now he knew. Now that he had seen the power of God working through him without even his conscious consent, and he would never doubt it again. Yep, faith is miracle working power. And we've heard lots of amazing stories. I know you have. But then there were those other times. The times we prayed to God for things and did not get them. The times that we prayed for healing and it didn't happen. We affirmed, we begged, we bargained. Why? When the situation was truly dire, we even tithed, for heaven's sakes. And yet, God did not seem to hear us. What we so desperately wanted and needed was not given, and we were confused, and we wondered, if my faith doesn't get me what I want and need, what's the point of it? Well, consider this. Perhaps it wasn't God that got that old lady up out of that wheelchair. And perhaps it wasn't the preacher either. Perhaps it was the faith itself that did the work. The power of faith that was in that little old lady. For most of us, deep abiding faith, the kind that can create miracles and sustain us through our big problems in life, doesn't happen overnight. That good soil has to be lovingly tended and tilled and fertilized. And I believe this is done primarily through the practice of trust. And I use the word practice on purpose. Here's another wonderful example from Scripture. Jesus stepped out of the boat and onto the shore, and the large crowd of people quickly pressed into him, wanting only to be close to him. There was a woman in the crowd who had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had gone to many doctors over the years and had spent everything she had to pay them, and still she had gotten no better. In fact, she was worse. Little by little, she pushed her way through the crowd and came up behind Jesus, thinking to herself, if I could just touch his robe, I will be healed. And so she stretched out her hand and was just barely able to lightly touch the hem of Jesus' garment. And immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel the energy that told her that her body had instantly been healed of its terrible condition. Jesus immediately sensed that a healing had occurred and turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my robe?" Timidly, the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." I can barely read those words without tears coming up. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over. So it seems that this woman, like the little old lady in the nursing home, was cured of her ailment. But then she was not cured by Jesus. He told her very plainly. She was healed by her faith. She was healed because she knew. She knew. She didn't hope. She knew. If I can just touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed. But think about it. Wasn't it trust that caused her to reach for that garment in the first place? And notice, Jesus didn't say to her, "Go, daughter, your ailment has been cured." He said, "Your faith has made you well. Go in peace, your suffering is over." This distinction is crucial. The woman trusted that she would be healed. And so even if her physical condition had not been cured, she would have been healed. She would have been made well because her suffering would have ended, and inner peace and wholeness would have been restored. And when you think about it, isn't that what we all most desire? A sense of well-being and peace and wholeness, an end to our physical and mental suffering. Maybe our money problems or health problems or relationship problems will clear up tomorrow, and maybe they won't. But either way, peace and a sense of well-being can be ours. It's not easy to release our insistence on thinking our way into solutions or having the outcome we prefer. We're so sure we know how things are supposed to be, right? But we can begin to grow our faith by practicing trust. Through the decision to trust, we can find the courage to take the actions we're guided to take. We can find the wisdom and courage to say what needs to be said. Trust can grow into the kind of abiding faith that will get us through and give us what we need, even if our problems do not go away tomorrow. But with well-developed faith, our suffering will end. Sure, pain is part of the human experience for everyone, but suffering is optional. The 12 powers are not about being able to do or have specific things like superhuman abilities. I think there's Batman versus Superman or something today. It's not about that. Taken together, the 12 powers are the description of the kind of steadfast character that naturally responds to life in a certain way, as Wallace Wattles would say. In Discover the Power Within You, Butterworth puts it this way: if you owned a mountain cabin and wanted to make it fresh and habitable after a long winter, would you first spend time raging about how stinky and dusty it is? Would you plead with the air to enter through the open door or the light to stream into the windows? No. Because the moment you opened the doors and windows, the wind and the sunshine would surge in of their own accord. These are exciting times we live in a lot of ways. But I'm thinking about the discovery of quantum physics. Since that began only, I think, about 20 years ago, scientists have been standing on the edge of a frontier called the science of consciousness. We are seeking to understand scientifically what mystics and shamans have always known: that consciousness, defined as the combination of our thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and beliefs, affects matter, changes that which it is focused upon. Yes, and the quality of that change has everything to do with the quality of that consciousness. Faith and trust produce one kind of result. Fear and doubt produce another. The ones we practice the most will have the greatest effect on the quality of our lives. I'll end this morning with another of my favorite poems. Okay, I guess they're all my favorites, but no, this one really is. Now is the time, by the great Sufi poet Hafiz. Now is the time to know that all you do is sacred. Now is the time to understand that all your ideas of right and wrong were just a child's training wheels. Now that you are ready to live with truth and love, it's time to finally lay those training wheels aside. My dears, please tell me, why do you insist on throwing stones at God and at your own heart? Why does that seductive voice inside you still sometimes incite you to fear? It's time to seriously consider a lasting truce with God and life and yourself. And now is the time for the world to know that every thought and action is sacred. Now it is time for us to realize the utter impossibility that there could be anything but grace. Yeah, don't you think it's time? We've struggled long enough. And so it is. God bless you.